Hey, everybody. In September, we are switching the name of our podcast to Unpacking with Sarah so that we can be more inclusive. It will feature all of our Daisy Girl Communications audio content to include the Unpacking Mormonism podcast, the Unpacking with Sarah podcast, and the Raising Crazy Growing Up to Show Up podcasts. Our show is meant for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care providers. If you or someone you know is in a mental health crisis, please call or text 988. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. Mason and I are your hosts today, and we are very excited to welcome to our show Lynn Smith Gregory, who is the great niece of Joseph Smith. She is a fellow memoir author. Her book, We Were Smith, Escaping the Shadow of Joseph Smith's Mormon Legacy, will be coming out. We don't know when, but she is working with the publishers on that. And she is here today to talk to us about the psychological impact of losing and rebuilding your community, to find your true authentic self, as well as to talk about how the positive toxic impacts our lives. Welcome to the show, Lynn. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Sarah Mason, for having me. I'm delighted to be here. As you said, I grew up a Mormon. I think of it as a Mormon on steroids because of my family association with Joseph Smith. Lived in Salt Lake City and left the church when I was around 19 when I took a temporary I was planning to go to BYU for college, but I'd graduated a year early from high school and missed the deadline. So I went to Utah State and planned to transfer after my first year. But there I had a professor that I adored who I discovered was an atheist. And he challenged me when he found out who I was to defend my faith in his upcoming religion class. And I was excited about the opportunity to show him the truth about the Mormon church and sure that I was going to do a good job standing up for my faith. And
Well, and I'm going to slow you down right there. I love that you had that confidence, because in Mormonism, defending the church, that this is the truth. So you have confidence doing this and you can do this because it's true. Like, that's indoctrinated in us when we're itty bitty, and we practice and we practice and we practice doing that in our religious community.
So true.
But everybody agrees with you. So it's this huge, I can defend the church in an echo chamber.
Right.
Now take me outside of that echo chamber. And as you're defending it, suddenly you begin to recognize there's some holes here and I don't know how to fill them. So how did that go for you, Lynn?
Well, I decided that he had probably read everything about the Mormons, and I knew there were books that were forbidden by the church to read, like No Man Knows My History, and others, and I knew he had read them. So in an attempt to do a really good job defending my religion, I decided I better read everything so I could mount a proper defense. And when I ordered the books, because they weren't available in my university library, and I had to have them sent to me. And when I started reading them, I had a page open titled Rebuttals, and that page never got filled up. I saw for the first time how outsiders, and these were scholars, historians, objective third-party sources that were using newspaper articles, signed affidavits, eyewitness accounts to
tangible evidence, right?
Tangible,
the evidence I can hold in my hand see with my eyeballs. Yeah.
Irrefutable facts. And I was shattered. I did not know what to do. But what the problem was is as I was reading them, they made sense to me. It was like, oh, so he went from being a gold digger to discovering gold plates. Well, I can see how that could happen. And
Right. The cogs clicked into place for the first time ever.
yeah, context for understanding Joseph Smith's story. And my ancestors also believed in visions and magical folklore and all kinds of spirits. And so his visions were not considered outlandish to his family because there was a belief system already in existence in the family. And I suddenly, things just started to fall into place. I read voraciously for a week, and I hadn't gone home for the semester break because I wanted to prepare. And by the time I was done, I just remember realizing, you don't believe this anymore, do you? And I realized I hadn't made a conscious decision not to believe it. I couldn't believe it. I could not see what I had seen.
Right.
And that was
growing up. Oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
I was gonna say it felt like the trap door of my life had opened up and I fell through.
Right. What were the thoughts of the book No Man Knows My History? Because in the introduction we talk about you are the great great niece of Joseph Smith. So there's probably this extra level of pride and this higher level of standard. And I'm assuming, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we are direct descendants of Smith. Therefore, we have to, as you said, do Mormonism on steroids because we have this name to uphold. What would it have been like if your family knew at that time that you were reading books like No Man Knows My History, or did you read The Shadow or Reality?
I can't remember
by the
that one, but
by the tuner.
well, they would have been scandalized and instantly warned me that I was doing damage to my eternal soul and letting Satan tempt me into dark waters. But and so it took a while for me to tell my family that I wasn't a believer anymore. But I stopped going to church. I stopped going to all the Mormon activities, institute, the dances, etc. And of course, the Mormon church sent the visiting teachers to come check on me and see where I was, and they knew who I was. My family growing up, I mean, we were held up as an example to the rest of the ward of this is a family to be emulated. We had a reserved place at sacrament meeting. Nobody sat in our row. It was bizarre. And I felt special. I was the envy of all my friends because of this connection. And suddenly it was the thing that I was most ashamed of, because to find out that Joseph Smith was a liar, a cheat, a predatory womanizer, that he practiced polygamy when at that time the Mormon church did not own that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And
right.
while they've since admitted that, yes, in fact, he was, and really added an amazing number of wives in a very short period of time. He, what I had made me special and set apart was now the thing that shamed me. And I felt such a mix of emotions. I felt foolish. I felt betrayed. I felt angry. I felt sad, and I felt lost. And I didn't know what I believed anymore. I mean, was even the idea of God true? I mean, if the Mormon church wasn't true, that 19-year-old black and white thinking, then the whole idea of God was possibly a myth as well. So
Yeah.
It's interesting how much you talked about the elite, like we had our own seat, like this is a family to be emulated. It's interesting how many things the church does that for. Like they'll hold this standard up as if it is the gold standard, but it's hollow. And then as soon as somebody recognizes that, it falls apart or whatever, it does more damage to the church than it ever helped the church.
Right.
And it's interesting how much they do that. The SEC thing with the fines and, we're hiding all of our money, when it would have just been easier if they'd have said, you know what, we're making a lot of money off of this. People need to know. Just let them know that this is what's going on. There'd have been a lot less damage overall. Same with church history in general, right? If Joseph Smith had just owned the fact that he was being a polygamist and that this is what God wanted, it would have been far less damaging overall than it was to everybody who learns about it now.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you said it was shameful. Like being a Mormon elite felt shameful on the other side of it.
Are you still there, Lynn?
Yeah, are you still there, Lynn? Because it looks like you're frozen. And I'm not sure. So Lynn has frozen for a minute, but let's see if she can come back into the show. Lynn, if you can still hear us, you might need to log out and log back in to StreamYard. And I'm going to email you. Oh, there we go. So I think she's logging in and then logging back out. But I absolutely loved what she said about, being Mormon elite. When she left, one of the first things that occurred for her was just being so ashamed that she had ever been held in that position of admiration, because when you're at the top of a lie, it's still a lie. And you have a lot further to fall. And then I also go ahead, Mason.
The same thing happens like with missionaries. One of the thoughts I had,
Right.
She said, I started reading so that I could defend my faith, because you don't really ever defend the faith. You defend your faith. You don't really ever defend the church or the history or anything like that. You're just like, well, I believe it and I know it because I've had a testimony. I've prayed about it, all of which might be really meaningful to you, but ultimately doesn't have any standing when it comes to factual information. As a missionary, you go out and you teach people about the church, but if ever there's any conflict, ever any real questions about church history or whatever, you basically just walk away. Well, they're not ready yet. Obviously, they're not ready to hear this message, so we'll just walk away. There's never any real thought or digging into why is this such an issue? Because you're taught as a missionary, we'll just walk away from those people. Go find someone that's going to listen to you. Don't argue about, whatever. Go find somebody that's going to listen to you. And in the church, that's typically the case. If your neighbor won't listen, well, then you be kind to them forever until they finally will listen and, blah, blah, blah.
Right. But then there's that motivation of we're only being neighborly so that they will eventually hear what I'm saying.
Right. That's
not accepting somebody or the relationship as their true authentic self. I like that Lynn was talking about how much loss that she felt not only lost, but that she was lost for a while. If you would like to donate to our show, you can do so through Venmo at Daisy Girl Communications.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
We were talking about, how difficult it is that if you're at the top, if you're a Mormon elite at the top of a lie, it's still a lie. And so when the story crumbles and you recognize that you've been a part of something that does not have factual truth at its foundation, you have a lot further to fall. And therefore, that betrayal trauma, the feelings of being lost are deeply rooted. And then you've got this added shame of how many people were looking at me. And I think a lot of that's how embarrassing that I was an elitist in this
or
group.
Even how many people are still looking at you as you
and how many people did you lead astray?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
A lot of pressure,
Right.
especially for a 19-year-old woman.
Right. And you said you were 19 at this time, correct?
Correct. Yes. And,
Wow.
I was young and I felt so special and privileged and grateful for my bloodline connection to Joseph Smith that when the bottom dropped out of my world, I took a massive hit. And I stopped going to church and other Mormon social functions. And of course, they sent the visiting sisters to come and check up on me, and they knew who I was. And when I admitted to them that I was no longer a believer, they were shocked, and then they pleaded with me. They said, you're being led astray by the devil. And they also threatened me. We'll tell the church authorities about this. You need to come back to church. And I knew they would immediately contact my parents. So that forced my hand, and I had to call my parents and have that really, really difficult phone call with them. And I told my parents separately. I had my mom on the phone first, and she was devastated, crying. And it was a big surprise to them because I was not a rebellious child. I had an older sister who was much more defiant, but I was sort of held up in my family as the golden child. These are the rewards when you work with God, and God rewards you with honors and accolades. And so they didn't see it coming.
I wish I had a female Book of Mormon character that was stalwart to compare you to, but as we all know, the females aren't mentioned that are stalwart really in the Book of Mormon. Mason was his family's Nephi, for sure. So his family is still taking it pretty hard. But yeah, we can absolutely relate with that, being the golden child or the favored because you were easy and strong belief.
Yeah.
It's interesting how much, and of course this isn't exclusive to you, but first the pleading, then the begging, then I'm surprised, but not really, the threats.
Well, there was the threat
shame.
that you're right. That came next. And, you're going to,
the exposure.
You and the guilt tripping, you are going to ruin our chance to be together as a family in the celestial kingdom. And,
well, then they undermine you as well. This is Satan just trying to get to you.
Right.
There's no recognition of the fact that, they never, ever talk about the actual information. They don't ask the questions, man, what led you to this, Lynn? What did you read? What did you discover? What's going on? No, it's always, this is all Satan. I can't believe you're letting Satan get into your life like this. But it's just again, it's that I'm going to defend my faith. I'm not going to defend the church because I can't defend the church. Because we're taught that you need to defend your faith and your testimony.
And
and they don't have the same information, and they don't have access to that information.
And they don't,
because if you read No Man Knows History, you're in trouble.
Yep.
So
why would you read that? That's not a church that's not a church person. That's,
resource or account. And it hurt that
Right.
they weren't at all curious. Like, what would lead you, like you said, to leave the church, Lynn? Why are you doing this? No,
Right.
they were coming from a position of absolutely knowing they had the truth. So there was no possible
Right.
reason I could give that would justify my leaving. And
Well, I'm a believer that Mormons are stunted in the curiosity development, because from the time we're little, everything quote unquote important we already have an answer for, so you don't need to be curious and learn and discover, which really stunts a part of our development. Like, kids are supposed to learn and test and discover, and
Yeah.
in Mormonism we don't really allow that.
That's such a good
Yeah.
point. And I have a YouTube channel that's coming out in a couple of weeks. And my very first YouTube story is about how my curiosity was shut down at an early age, but how ultimately it saved me and led me to the truth. But you're right. You are not supposed to think for yourself, let alone encouraged to think for yourself. You're told that the thinking has been done for you. And I was told time and time again, that's not what we're talking about, Lynn. Keep that question. It'll be answered at some future date. And you don't need to worry about that.
Right.
Sit down, be quiet, and pay attention to the lesson.
Right. There's going to be in Mormon heaven an existential question and answers day where finally everything that doesn't make any sense is going to make sense. And I truly believe if that day comes, we're going to discover, hey, Joseph Smith was not an honest person.
Right.
And I mean, the reality is what the reality is. And I think it's very difficult when you've been told that the reality is based on your internal emotions and how you feel about information.
Correct.
It's very difficult to accept information that feels yucky, but things being uncomfortable and yucky is a part of our human existence. There's no other way around. Sometimes things feel
yucky.
Icky.
Yeah.
That's how life is. It's supposed to be that way.
Right.
So
we have the whole experience of being human. We are complex creatures, and we experience reality. And sometimes, we're not happy, and sometimes we are confused, but none of that is acceptable. And this kind of segues into the toxic positivity, which I define as, and I'll give examples because I think that's the easiest way to understand toxic positivity. Look on the bright side, or God will never give you more than you can handle, or your pioneer ancestors really had it difficult. You should be grateful for how easy it is to be a member of the church today. And particularly with women, women are supposed to have a happy smile on their face, regardless of what they're experiencing inside. And that's what toxic positivity is repressing the full range of your emotions and being encouraged to deny them, suppress them, reject them, and put on a facade that everything is okay. And I love
that. I'm going to pause you because you talked about like the women are supposed to be perpetually happy. And I would say, I'm going to grow that a little bit and say, I feel like women in the church are supposed to be perpetually grateful to their male counterparts, because they can't do anything of value without the male either helping them, providing I can't become a mother without the semen of the man. Therefore, I should be grateful. I'm grateful that you work for me and that I have a good life. I'm grateful, like this constant I have to be grateful and in awe of how much a man is providing in my life. And I'm supposed to do that to the point that my role as raising children, my role in the community, my role in bringing in income, my role is completely erased.
Yeah.
And that's part of that patriarchy, but it's also part of, like, we don't talk about our mother in heaven, if there is one. We don't talk about the role that women have, other than, I know for me, look how pretty the centerpiece is on this Relief Society table. Look how pretty this is decorated. Women make things pretty, and that's our only, and we're supposed to look pretty, and that's our only role. So cook from scratch, keep the kids quiet and not embarrassing, keep our building pretty, have lots of children, and like you said, have a smile etched on your face constantly. If you're not sleeping with a smile on your face, you are unrighteous and doing something wrong. You need to be grateful no matter how hard things are. You're grateful because you have a man. And if you don't have a man, then we pity you.
Exactly. You have no value in the organization if you're not a mother. But I'd like to talk about a couple of things you touched on there. I mean, implicit, I remember asking, well, why, at 14, I think it's 14, do boys get the priesthood, which is the power to act in God's name? And
it's 12.
12. And
it's 12. And they recently changed it to 11 if you're turning 12 in that calendar year. So my 11-year-old boy, so my son turns his birthday is in April. So the year he was 11, the January he was 11, he could have gotten the power to work in God's name. So keep going.
Implicit in that is that I'm somehow not worthy enough. You cannot avoid that conclusion. I'm not worthy enough to be gifted with the power to act in God's name. And that, I remember asking, why am I learning to cross stitch and crochet when he gets the power to act in God's name? I mean, the contrast was really upsetting to me. And I remember...
Well, you should be grateful that you don't get the priesthood because it's such a heavy burden.
And responsibility.
You poor
yes. People. And also, I was given this mixed message of my value. Women in Utah are highly feminized. I mean, they're the Mormon blogosphere, the Mormon mommy blogosphere out there of Mormon influencers with their perfectly done hair, their makeup, their nails, etc., looking like they can feed their daughter their organic baby food they made themselves and sew all the matching clothes and do it without breaking a sweat. And this is part of that toxic cult positivity culture. And I think the Mormon Church encourages it because they've invested in an image of the Mormon Church as these happy, healthy, wholesome families. And so, but the mixed message I got was, well, why am I even going on to college? I mean, why am I being expected to get good grades and learn things when I'm going to become a wife and mother and pivot? And then my husband's dreams are going to be what I support and champion, not mine. And also the purity message. Here you are supposed to, there's competition in the Mormon Church. I don't know if you're aware, but in Utah,
it's fierce. Worse in Utah than, so Mason was military, and I grew up in Snowflake, Arizona, which is like mini Utah, a little mini Provo, Utah, of an environment. They're like over 80% of the population was Orthodox active Mormons, and probably the majority of the rest of it was inactive, less Orthodox Mormon. And then Mason grew up also in Arizona. So yeah, we had that. But then when he joined the military and we moved away, a lot of the competition and just those strict adherence to things out in the, quote unquote mission field, it was a lot more relaxed, and I could tolerate that. And I use the word tolerate consciously. I could tolerate that a lot better. And then when I would go home and be back in those Arizona wards where there was no acceptance for different from the norm, it was really difficult for me. Like I didn't like it because it was so icky. It was so culty, and I would not have put that word on it then, but I'm going to put that word on it.
Well,
now.
And there's literally competition in Utah. There's a 3-to-1 ratio of worthy Mormon women to worthy Mormon men. So I think there's that, be as attractive as possible, but then it's like, look, but don't touch, because the responsibility for remaining pure remains primarily the woman's responsibility. The boys didn't get the same lectures that we did growing up. Your body is a temple. Don't let boys defile it. Yes, both sexes are encouraged to be virgins when they get married, but the responsibility for no sexual contact lies primarily with the woman. And so you're supposed to attract a man, but then not do anything once he's attracted to you, except rush into an early marriage.
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of clarify a little bit what I've seen on that. I would say that the women were in charge of the action-based things for maintaining the purity culture. So we were tasked with dress correctly, speak correctly, look correctly, so that boys don't mess up. Because if they do, then it's your fault. So we were tasked with action for maintaining purity, whereas our boys were tasked with the inaction portion of purity, which was don't look at the woman, don't have those thoughts, don't masturbate, don't look at porn. And so I think that oftentimes we kind of look at the women's role because our behaviors, because it was observable. What we were supposed to do to maintain the law of chastity was observable.
Right.
What the boys were supposed to do to maintain the law of chastity was not observable, because most men are not going to be masturbating or looking at porn in a public setting. So their lectures of how to maintain purity culture were vastly different than the woman's, and I'm going to say vastly damaging, but in a very different way, in a way that for both of us created sexual shame and then interference with even Mormon couples' ability to sexually connect in healthy ways. I mean, so I'm a counselor. I can't tell you how many Mormon couples I've had in where they're not enjoying sexual relations because of the shadow of trauma that occurred in their teachings as youth, how they're supposed to behave. And then as soon as you're married, it's, flip the switch. And depending on what generation you grew up in, you still had don't masturbate, no oral sex, none of,
Right.
missionary style is the only way, and keep the lights down. You had that piece. Right. Sorry, my Apple, I got a new Apple Watch and it keeps dinging and I keep trying to shut it off and I'm giving up. It's going to ding. It's my watch. It's new. So anyway, it interferes. What we don't realize in Mormonism is that these teachings that we're giving our kids from the time they're itty bitty damage them for life. But because everybody in the community is struggling with it, or most everybody is struggling with it, that's just the norm. I remember being told sex is mostly for the man's enjoyment.
Right.
And I'm 43.
And
I'm 43. I was out of the right, and procreation, and how horrible that is for so many women. And I love the work of the Nagowski sisters, but especially Emily Nagowski, who's written the book, Come As You Are. And we're starting to normalize our human sexuality in a way that's very connective for
Right.
partners. And she has another book that just came out, Emily Nagowski, about oh shoot, I can't remember what it is. I'll look it up, but it's about intimacy and coming together as intimate partners in your relationship. It's a phenomenal book. And I love it because we're starting to really break down those barriers. And when I would prescribe that reading to my patients, some of them wouldn't get past the first couple of chapters because it was evil sexual practices. And I'm like, this is consenting adults in your own room. This doesn't harm anybody.
But
So it was very interesting to me. But I would say that females were in charge of the action of purity culture. Males were in charge of the inaction of purity culture. And when they would bump together in ways and cross those boundaries, we were also taught to blame the other person. It was always the woman's fault that she was pregnant, not the man's. But then most likely the man is experiencing that internal shame because you're sexually active. Now you have to stop, but now you're not allowed to do the things that release sexual tension without a partner, but you're not married. And so, yeah, it's horrible on both sides. And it is Coming Together, or Come Together, is the name of Emily Nagowski's second book, which is Sexual Intimacy Within Partnerships, that really helps break that down. So for our listeners, if you and your partner are having some struggles in the bedroom because of the Mormon or other religious shadows and rules and regulations of what sexual intimacy is supposed to look like, highly recommend Emily Nagowski's book, Come Together. Trauma Bonded is available anywhere books are sold.
That's a great distinction. And you're right. The shame and the trauma is on both sides, male and females. And I think the women also experience, with the toxic positivity, looking around and comparing themselves to their sisters, other women in their community, in their ward. And if they have 3 kids and they're struggling and they're not happy, they look across the street and their sister Anderson, and she has 5 kids and she seems very happy, and she's Relief Society president too. And what happens is an internalization of, well, there must be something wrong with me. I'm not being devoted enough. I'm not spending enough time reading the scriptures. It's my fault. Which is why one of the things that really shocked me was to learn that Mormon women in Utah have one of the highest antidepressant rates in the country. And
Also, I believe, higher than even Hollywood, California rate of cosmetic surgery.
Only Florida has higher rates of plastic surgery than Utah. So that's telling you something is going on that's very toxic, particularly for women. And it's
right.
Yeah.
Well, and can I interject here?
Please.
One of the things that's fascinating to me about that is that when I look over at Sister Anderson and I see, she's got the 3 children and she's struggling. Me, the sister, or I'm sorry, you said look over at Sister Anderson. She's the one with 5 kids and thriving. And then I'm the other one with the 3 kids and I'm struggling. What both Sister Anderson and I see is she's better than me. God loves her more than me. Her reward in heaven is going to be better than mine. So we're not just shaming ourselves with the I'm not good enough, I'm falling apart as a mother, which mama shaming is rampant in the United States. Just rampant. It does not matter how amazing of a parent you are. It's rampant. I was the Sister Anderson. I was the one, we've got 9 kids right now. 7 of them are ours forever. And 2 of them are fosters that are choosing us as their parents right now. So I've got all these kids. I've got special needs kids, and I'm the mom. I'm holding it together, and I'm a counselor, and she knows everything. And just me existing and whatnot at church, people are looking at me going, Sister Westbrook is a rock star. I will never be as good as Sister Westbrook.
Yeah.
But what they don't see is inside my home, I've got 3 kids with severe mental illness. I've got one with schizophrenia, one on the autism spectrum, one with reactive attachment disorder. And every moment of every day is a fight to keep those kids in a place of emotional regulation. And I am burned out. And I'm the one looking at, Sister Smith over here going, wow, she's so calm. Look how well she has it together. Because we're in a community where we're not allowed to show our vulnerability.
And
because if somebody serves that, I can't be transparent, because if I am and I show that I'm having a hard time, the assumption is I've sinned, or Satan's in my life, or it's not. She has 9 kids and 3 of them are special needs. And that is overwhelming and exhausting, because God is going to give me all the skills and tools I need since he gave me those kids.
Right.
It's very isolating in a lot of ways.
Yes.
A lot of ways it's the same as the hiding of church history. If you take the time to examine church history, of course, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So that's the main reason why we're taught not to even go there. But the same thing happens with our families, right? If your abilities as a mother are a basic reflection of your righteousness as a person
and worthiness
as a person, you've become isolated, because you will always feel less than you are. And everyone else, because you don't see into their lives, are always going to look better than you. And there's no way for you to actually have an honest, open conversation with someone, because it's exposing you as somebody less than what you're supposed to be, instead of allowing us to just talk. You know what? Motherhood is hard. Oh my gosh, you have an autistic child. Whoa, what can I do to help? And and not just how can I help you, but what can I do to help? Not just
bring me a lasagna.
Can we
for
come
dinner?
together? Can we be strengths for each other, recognizing that right now our house is a crap show, right? There's just so much going on, and it's tough, and it's okay that there's so much going on.
I think it's crap shoot and shit show, but I'll let you have your clean language there.
Whatever.
No, the other thing that really stands out to me, Lynn, is that you said, Utah has the highest rate of plastic surgery next to Florida. And I would say everything about the Mormon church is quote unquote plastic, in the sense of everything that is icky or not perfect is whitewashed. So our history, we can't look at our history and say, here's, Joseph Smith was a little bit of a horny man. He was maybe a little sexually promiscuous. He definitely had a thing for the younger women, girls. I wouldn't say he was a pedophile, but definitely a sexual predator for sure, because he liked them somewhat sexually developed, and that's kind of icky. We can't say that about Joseph Smith. So instead, we're going to create this side story of he didn't want to, and it was horrible for him, and God told him anyway. That's the, oh my goodness, my breasts are too small, and it doesn't matter what I do or what bra I wear. In order for me to be accepted in my community, I need to look better so that I am desirable, so that I can make it. It becomes this big mess in that bikini industry complex that Brene Brown talks about, the BIC of having, Emily Nagowski, other than, I've had a baby and I've got stretch marks. I've got to get rid of those to still be desirable. How devastating, because God made us. If there is a God, he made us how we are, and we can't even accept what God made because it's not perfect enough. Because everything in the church has to be Perfect. And so, yes, I agree that toxic positivity
and that
in the
focus
church is
on
devastating.
appearances, that facade, and every member a missionary, that motto, your job is to make sure that Mormons look good to outsiders because they're all potential converts. And so, and
Right.
I mean,
You're constantly mad.
yes. And I remember just being so upset when I would fly home when I left, I knew I couldn't stay. When I left the church, I knew I couldn't stay in Utah. So I left and moved to New York City, sight unseen. And I would fly home once a year to see my family at Christmas time. And it was a very uncomfortable affair. But one of the things I remember getting very angry about was these happy families at the airport with their posters welcoming home their returned missionary. And they all looked so happy and so like they didn't have any problems. And I remember thinking, yeah, well, where are the people like me in your family? The black sheep, the transgender, your gay son, your rebel daughter, with their Doc Martens and tattoos. You don't see them there. It's not an inclusive kind of family experience. If you don't look like you belong, it's embarrassing for a Mormon family.
Yeah.
And they don't often bring them, include them.
Right.
Well, the very idea that you felt like you had to leave,
Right.
like you could not be accepted by your family. They couldn't come to terms with the fact that you don't believe the way they do anymore. And you felt like the only way to escape that was to actually
Physically
escape
leave.
that. Whether that was true, maybe that wasn't true of your whole family. Maybe they would have come to terms with it. Who knows? But you felt like that was the only way.
And that
And a lot of
otherwise I
people
was
do.
going to bring shame on the family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you talk about this. So there's two terms, you're talking about toxic positivity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the positive toxic in the sense of you look at these families, right? They're coming home. They are, what a beautiful family. They're happy. They're engaged in an activity altogether. There is that community, that tribal acceptance going on. All of those things are positive. And then our brain, our developmental brains need that. We are a herd animal. We need our communities. We need our families, and we need that togetherness. And so they have that really well. Mormons have that positive developmental community need met. But
it's one of the main attractions to converts to the church is that strong sense of community and family. Mm-hmm.
But it's toxic and I'm going to say a little bit archaic in the sense of like what you said, Lynn. If you don't fit the mold, where are the black sheep? Where are the people showing up that are covered in tats and piercings? Where are the people that are, what's going on? Now, some families are going to do really good at embracing the black sheep, and others are not. But in the Mormon community, the black sheep, the person that is divergent from the norm, is tagged dangerous. And that is what makes such a beautiful and positive thing in the church toxic. So I want our listeners to recognize there's the toxic positivity, which is I'm going to stamp a smile on my face. I'm going to hide who I am so that I can be accepted. But then you also have the positive toxic, which is I need this community. This is positive. It meets developmental needs throughout my development, but it's still toxic because I cannot be me and stay.
Yes.
And in the wild, in our hunter-gatherer era, those individuals that were kicked out of their tribes for being different, they were the ones that usually did not survive, or they had to really, really struggle to build a new community. And so I love where this is taking us. What would you like to add there, Lynn?
Well, just like you said, I think that's I think that is one of the key components that attract people to the church, and that the church encourages that facade, or that image that they spend millions of dollars cultivating, and it hides a problem such as the LGBTQ rate of suicide in Utah, and the fact that, and that breaks my heart, because there is just so many individuals, whether they're gender or sexual divergent, and there is no acceptance if you start coloring outside the lines.
Right.
My little sister, who had 9 children, recently just left the church when one of her children came out as gay. And he was beloved in the family. Everyone thought of him as the peacemaker, the one that was always so kind and had a big heart. And my little sister said she just could not wrap her brain around the idea that she belonged to a church who thought he was an abomination in God's eyes.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can do so through Venmo at Daisy Girl Communications.
If your whole doctrine is based on essentially conformity, then you lose the power of your doctrine if you are inclusive.
Right.
You have to be exclusive. You have to say, in this case, they have to say, this is the ideal. You have to change to meet that ideal. This is where God wants you to be. You have to change to meet that.
Exactly.
Instead of recognizing that there are other ways that you can be inclusive. And they'll always come back to, well, Jesus loved everybody, yes, but he wanted everybody to change, to become, the whatever God wants us to be. And if that's how you set things up as an organization, as a church, then it becomes very difficult for you to be inclusive, because you lose the power of your doctrine if now you change it.
Such an excellent
and they've done it all the time.
That is such an excellent point, that it's built into the very core fabric of the hierarchical, patriarchal structure, this conformity and this exclusionary, and very few people of color. Let's admit it. I mean, it's
well, and where you are starting to see those people of color, like in Africa, where there's a huge influx of membership growing there, they're not getting the full story.
Right. They're not getting the 1978 and earlier.
They're not told that in the United States there isn't a large population of Black Mormons. They're not told about the fact that for 150 years of our history, you couldn't be a full-fledged Mormon. They're not told that. They're just told the whitewashed, come be a part of our community. We have so much to offer you. They're not told that. And that is how the church operates. Let's get you involved. Let's get you sucked in. Let's help you see the positive parts of the church, and just completely glossed over the negative parts because they don't matter.
And they're not going to be effective in recruiting new members. I think of the Mormon Church, frankly, as a business organization. I mean, you cannot look at the kind of wealth. It's the second wealthiest Christian religion in the world after the Catholic Church. And that Washington Post, when the whistleblower came forward and revealed that the Mormon Church had the second largest private equity fund in the world, some people said 100 billion. Other people said the figure is really closer to 200 billion. But it shocked Wall Street. I mean, I think people don't understand the power, scope, and wealth of the Mormon Church because it is a global organization and not a just, they think of people in Utah and even the offshoots, polygamous offshoots, as Mormons.
Right. Well, and I think it's, I agree with you, Lynn. I think it's a business model. I think it's that MLM business model, though, where the people at the bottom are getting nothing but doing all of the work. And the people at the top are incredibly wealthy and just sitting in a couple of meetings a day on a regular basis and making all of these rules. And for me, it was always interesting on the financial side. They're saying, oh, well, these funds we're saving for the last days. And I'm like, but once the computer systems crash, you have nothing because your money's all in stocks and nobody's going to buy your temple. So you're going to have a hard time saying that this is for after the last days when the entire economy is supposed to collapse. We're not going to have a stock market anymore. If you're truly reading in the Mormon doctrine and even Christian doctrine in general, what's supposed to happen in the last days in Revelation, there's not going to be a stock market. Money in the stock market is no longer going to exist. It will evaporate because it's a non-tangible asset. It's not a house that I can live in. It's not food I'm growing in my garden. It's a number on a computer that is supposedly sitting in the bank somewhere. That utter collapse, it won't be there. The other thing that's really fascinating to me is that it's not just the LGBTQ plus population or, the racial divide, but what about marital plurality? I think that we really, as a community in the ex-Mormon community, need to start pointing that out. We have this relationship build that is becoming more talked about. It's always been there, but now we're actually talking about it, where there is plurality in relationships. And Mormons have this strong history of plurality in their marriages. The difference is today we want it with consenting adults, not children, and out in the open, not in secret. But somehow, if I was to go out and have another partner, I would get excommunicated unless the church has given me permission to do it after one of my previous partners is dead. And I get to then live in that plurality in the next kingdom. Like it doesn't, their logic doesn't make sense in how any of these populations came about, how they're supposed to be treated, and what God thinks or deems is necessary for them.
Well, and it was shocking to me to realize that Mormon doctrine maintains that polygamy, in fact, will be practiced in the afterlife, in the celestial kingdom. I mean, and they gloss over that as they're preparing young women to get married. They don't say, and your reward for your sacrifices and your devotion and commitment is sharing your husband in the afterlife. I mean,
and being perpetually pregnant.
Yeah. One of the reasons you can't talk about Heavenly Mother really is because it opens up a whole can of worms where you're not ready to have that conversation because they don't talk about it at all.
Right. But if you, Mason, had another partner, like if we had a triad where you had another female partner or I had another male partner or both, you would be excommunicated for it. But if I died, you could do it and it would be okay. But in our not too distant past, it would have been okay for you to have more than one as long as a prophet assigned you that person. It wouldn't have been by choice. Although some of it was, hey, I want this girl. Can I have her? What was it? Brigham Young who said the women were cattle. Yeah. So Lynn, my question is, what was the psychological impact for you as the great niece of Joseph Smith and this elitist Mormon family? What was it like for you losing all of your community in, I'm going to say, a couple of weeks? What was that like for you?
It was devastating. I felt so lost. And I discovered that I couldn't outrun my knee-jerk reactions to doing things that, like swearing. I mean, I felt the flush of shame, having my first cup of coffee. And I made a list of all the things I was going to do as an atheist or a non-Mormon and systematically started checking them off the list. But I couldn't control my brain, and these tapes would start playing, shaming me for my behavior. And that was really difficult. And I think that's why I did a geographic too, was I thought I can reinvent myself. No one will know who I am. There won't be any Mormons around in New York City. I can be anonymous. No one will know my family history. But it was a huge cultural shock. I did not understand the norms for behavior in New York City. I didn't know what was appropriate, what wasn't appropriate. So it was just a very, I mean, I knew
you went from one side of the color spectrum. Yeah, you went from one side of the color spectrum all the way to the other one. Like, if that's not a 180-degree turn, Lynn, I don't know what is. And I love New York City.
I love New York City, and I stayed for
and
the
their
next
theater
15 years.
and their theater.
I didn't go home. There was no home to go to for me. And I was essentially estranged from my family, and only came home once a year at Christmas time, and watched. It was heartbreaking for me to watch all my younger brothers and sisters rush into marriage at 18, 19, 20, before I felt like they even knew what they wanted in a partner or had any experiences or relationships to compare them to. And of course, I couldn't go to their Mormon weddings. Right. And I have memories of standing outside the temple so that I could be in the family photos afterwards. But of course, they couldn't understand why my feelings were hurt when I said, and I tried to explain that weddings are usually,
because it's your own fault.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. They're going to see it as it's your own fault. If you hadn't left the church, you'd have been in here. Why did you exclude yourself?
And why would you even want to come?
And we're going to take pictures. Right. And we're going to take pictures outside of the temple so that we have that mask of nobody was excluded from our wedding ceremony. We're not going to do anything where people can see who's on the inside. I love that you said you had to escape, because that fits right into the title of your book. Like, We Were Smith, Escaping the Shadow of Joseph Smith. Right. Like that's huge for you. I love the title of your upcoming book, because it just describes what you're talking about right now. And I felt
like in New York that I was trying to outrun a tsunami of guilt and shame. And I really kind of lost my way. I felt unrooted. I felt unconnected. The internet wasn't around. I couldn't Google ex-Mormons in New York City. So there wasn't a way to find a supportive community, which is one of the most important things I would recommend to anyone who is considering exiting a high control religion, is to find other people who are in your shoes that you can relate to, and so that you don't feel so alone and isolated. And
have you found ways that are effective in doing that? Because that's something even we're still struggling with at this point in time, is how do you find a new community without, like I grew up in the church, and I was in the military, but even then, when you move, it's always, you go to church that first Sunday and there's your community, right? You just got to figure out they're going to be.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, say that again. It's what and play?
You instantly get that instant community. And without having to build those relationships based on shared experiences and commonalities of values. You know everything about the other person as soon as they introduce themselves as sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so.
Yeah. You automatically trust them. You automatically know you can count on them, which of course isn't always the case, but
Right,
that's the way that you feel. You know, if I need anything, I can call the bishop, or I can call my home teachers, my visiting teachers. I have a
Resources,
built-in
support.
community.
Right. And that's that positive toxic, as in we all need communities where there are people that we can trust and that we can lean on and that we can turn to. In Mormonism, that community can be very toxic because, like Mason, you said, we would move all the time because of the military. As soon as we found out somebody was Mormon, automatic trust.
Right.
And yet,
And so
you
I
look
kind of,
at Mormon history, sexual predators are rampant in high demand religions. Rampant. So go ahead, Lynn.
well, I kind of lost my way. New York City was awash in the booming Wall Street economy, cocaine, alcohol, Studio 54. And I kind of gravitated, and I think I experimented with drugs and drank too much as a way of shutting down the critical voice in my brain that was constantly shaming me. And one of my biggest faults was my perfectionism. I couldn't get rid of the fact that I wasn't supposed to be perfect. I was just changing new standards for the old ones, but that need to be perfect, that lack of self-esteem, that sense of unworthiness. And so I kind of got in trouble. And luckily I found a therapist that helped me kind of start to unpack some of my dysfunctional family situations, scenarios, and I realized the dynamics. But I quickly understood that my mother's powerlessness in the family and her inability to stand up for me was in fact religious trauma, that she was a victim of religious trauma as well. And so in that process of pulling at that thread, it started to unravel that many of my issues and much of my trauma was in fact caused by the institution itself. My father's harshness. I mean, he felt he was responsible for his kids, becoming righteous. And so, and the fact that some of them were disobedient, like myself, was a reflection on him. And so I could see how much, but there weren't religious trauma therapists out there at the time. I was really fortunate. I say graced to meet a man who was a recovering Catholic, and we talked and met and married, and he and I kind of sorted through some of these, had these discussions about religion that were helpful as well as stay working with the therapist. But ultimately, I had to find individuals rather than a community. And I found myself always looking for a family to plug into. I think I would have been very vulnerable to a cult or some situation that duplicated the kind of certainty that Mormonism provided me in terms of having the answers. And I'm very fortunate I didn't go down that path. And luckily for me, a couple of decades after I did, a couple of my other brothers and sisters became inactive. They didn't have the same, made the same decision that the church was untrue. They just were inactive, and because they got tired of some of the hypocrisy or the rigorous standards to live up to. And they all kind of said, well, I'll probably go back to the church later in my life because it's a good place to raise children. And I thought, really? You know, but that helped. And I talk about this in the book, there was a crisis in my family. A big secret was revealed, and I won't go into that here, but it brought my family to its knees. And we decided as a family to go ahead with the recommendation the therapist who met with us said to go into family therapy. So once a year, I would come home for a family reunion that was one day of therapist facilitated family discussion. And I'm really, really unusual in the sense that everybody in the family chose to participate, and that there was a desire for connection regardless of our differences. And that's very unusual.
Very rare for every member of the family. I have in all of my years of clinical practice, I have only had that happen once, where I've had families that have brought like adult siblings, parents in because of a crisis that the family was experiencing. I've had it happen once where they all were motivated to work together. It was a beautiful thing, but it is so incredibly rare. I also, Lynn, wanted to speak to, you said your mom couldn't stand up for you and that was part of her religious trauma. And I just want to say, I agree. My mom stood by and watched my dad abuse me.
Right.
And because of her religious upbringing of, you don't question the man, he's the priesthood holder, you hearken to your husband as he hearkens to the Lord. For my mom, it was, if so, I'm going to use his student name from my book. So because Dave is making these mistakes, I'm off the hook for any of the negative consequences of them because he's the priesthood holder and it's his job to do everything right. And then I'm just supposed to follow him. And if he messes up, I'm still safe because all my responsibility is to follow the priesthood holder. And because of that ingrained in her brain, part of that, I'm sure there were other things that stopped her from standing up for me, but she didn't stand up for me because she wasn't allowed to question. And I think that's a huge thing. I think too, it's really important to point out that you said, when you're finding your new community, instead of looking for an organization to replace your old organization, you need to look for specific individuals, because all organizations have their issues. And so many organizations, like you said, I was vulnerable to rejoining a cult. Well, yeah, because that high demand, we're right, they're wrong, us versus them thinking is familiar to you. So you're super vulnerable for that.
Exactly.
So what kinds of qualities were you looking for in individuals as you began to rebuild your community?
Well, I was looking for individuals who had some sort of background, like my best friend that I met in New York, and she's still my best friend to this day. Her parents were Salvation Army ministers, but she left the Salvation Army and she was an atheist or agnostic. And so she and I, we had similar paths, even though they weren't identical. She could understand what it was like living in a family shaped so heavily by religion. A therapist,
Right.
And then I started looking for places where later on, when I felt healed enough to, I looked for places where I could support other women struggling with coming out of a high demand religion. And that's, in fact, I do some volunteer work in that area. And so I had to rebuild kind of a friend community one by one, rather than find an existing group to belong to. And of course, starting my own family and doing it differently than my parents did was very healing for me as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I love that. I find that, finding people who get your trauma is really important, because then when you're talking to somebody about that trauma, they're less likely to inadvertently minimize it. I hear a lot of people like, oh, you just need to get over that, or that was a long time ago, just let it go already. Right. But if you're talking about it, it means you're not ready to let it go. And so when you're, connecting with people who have similar trauma, it can be very cathartic and healing, but you also have to look for, other qualities. Like for me, I feel like the church was unbelievably dishonest. I grew up in a home where my dad was narcissistic. And so, I never knew what was true. I never knew what wasn't true, because he was always playing with, the reality in my life. And so for me, because that was a huge trauma point for me, I needed to find friends who were boldly, straight up honest. Like, I want you to tell me how it is so I don't have to guess at what you're thinking all of the time. And that was important for me in my friend groups as I've left. I mean, it was important before I left Mormonism, but even more so after I left the Mormon church. And I would say that my friends, my closest friends in the world, have similar experiences of leaving a high demand organization. Not always Mormonism, just I've got one friend who left a high demand organization that was not religious. That's a very close friend. And then the other one was being brutally honest, and then radical acceptance. People who were good at accepting everybody just the way they were, and to not gossip about them behind their backs. That was a huge one for me too. If I hear you talking badly about somebody else, that's not a safe person for me, because I know when I'm not there, you're going to talk badly about me behind my back. And so for me, that individual is so important, like you said, Lynn, but also listeners, please, please, please identify those things in your life, those few values, and don't make that list 30 things long. Like, you want to kind of do a broad, because nobody's going to fit it if you've got them so specific. That's like when I remember finding my journal of what I wanted in a husband when I was like 14 years old as a youth activity, and I wanted him to be tall, and I wanted him to have dark hair. Got it. I wanted him to be handsome. I wanted a returned missionary. Like, I wasn't talking about characteristics. And so I think that characteristics instead of achievements is a great thing to look at when you're rebuilding that community, and identify what do we have in common, but also what do I really need from a friend to feel safe. For me, that's brutal honesty.
Well, that's
and I think my friends are good at that. Would you say? The ones that are closest to me.
That's
Danny. I'm looking at you, Danny.
That's part of the toxicity of this kind of high demand religion, is that they do not train that. Right. The idea, tall, dark, and handsome, right? Well, that's certainly not just Mormon. That's life. That's
Prince Charming.
American or whatever, right? That's Disney. But the idea that a returned missionary is more important than someone who is kind. Yeah. The idea that can take me to the temple is more important than someone who
is honest,
is patient or honest, or those kinds of things.
Gentle.
Like, there's
a
nothing,
listener.
Right? There's nothing necessarily wrong with wanting someone who is also dedicated to the church that you're a part of, but usually that is to the exclusion of everything else. We're taught that if you marry a returned missionary, or if you marry in the temple, that means you're both worthy, you're both interested in doing the same things.
Everything else you can work out later.
And everything else will work out, because you're both dedicated to this marriage, but you haven't actually discussed your
Yes.
marriage.
I think that's
you're
really
dedicated to God.
That's really important, what you're sharing about, what you're looking for, and not being taught that these qualities that make for healthy relationships are more important than than checking the boxes of returned missionary, Mormon, maybe not a convert, whatever your boxes are.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can do so through Venmo at Daisy Girl Communications. Yeah.
Well, and it's the same thing with the building community, right? Like, so you talked about when you left the community of Mormonism, you found that you had to form friendships with individuals. Way better, because in order to have a real relationship with an individual, you have to be vulnerable, you have to share, you have to have workable qualities that you both find important.
Quality that time together.
Right, that requires you becoming intimate in an emotional way, in whatever way is important to you both as individuals. But it's also exhausting, because you spend all that effort to get a friend.
Mm-hmm.
You go back to Mormonism, you have friends up the wazoo almost right away. It's empty most of the time,
right,
with most people, but it is an immediate friendship. It's an immediate community, and so it has a lot of draws to it. It also reminds you of the poor, of the what you're going to lose if you walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And I would feel like most people who walk away from Mormonism talk about the fact that they lost their community. This is a very, very common thing.
yes,
But we're not taught to form a real community. We're not taught how to form real friendships. We're not taught how to form a real intimate relationship, because it's all based on the standards of the church. It's all based on being able to go to the temple, return missionary, priesthood holder, blah, blah, blah. It's all based on that, and we're not taught. Like, I grew up in a very loving home, but I had zero emotional connection. I still struggle with becoming emotionally connected to anybody. Or emotionally invested in anybody, anything, including my family, my wife and my kids. I still really struggle with that, because I was never taught that. That wasn't important. What was important is that you were at the activities, that you were living the church standards, that you weren't doing this, that you were doing that. And there was no emotional instruction at all. And so, yeah, I think that is such a struggle, because we just aren't taught how to do it.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I couldn't agree more. And I love your focus on the reality of losing that community and then discovering what real friendship is like, and not the empty association with people that you make huge assumptions about, because there's so little transparency in those friendships.
Well, and a story from my life that readers can read in my book or listen to the audiobook of my book, is that I discovered who my true friends were by when I had a marital affair. Mason and I were struggling, and the friends who were my closest friends and actually are still my best friends today, they didn't judge me. There was no judgment. It was, wow, you must be struggling. How are you doing? We love you and Mason. We're here for you. Never once did I get, you're just a nasty, filthy whore. You're unworthy. It was, they just loved me and embraced me. And I needed that to survive. Like, I'm going to be honest. I needed that to choose to alive myself. I couldn't have done it without that community that loved me for me, as I have, been a parent and struggled with raising my special needs kiddos. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to hit this kid. I need help. There's no, well, you really need to do this or that to get better at parenting. It was, we'll be right there. Go get your break. We will watch your kid, even though they are in the middle of a schizophrenic or autism meltdown. We will walk in and handle the tantrum. You walk out, keep your babies safe. And so, I've got the banner at the bottom of the screen for those of you who feel alone and you're in a mental health crisis and you need help. Please call or text the hotline at 988. They have people ready to listen and not judge you and hear what your struggles are. I've called or texted this number. I texted it actually. And it helped me alive myself. I struggle with some pretty good depression under times of significant stress. And, so there are resources there, even if you're lacking that community. So, Lynn, what else would you like to share? We're getting ready to, we're getting close to our time for our show. What else do you feel is so important for our audience to hear about that you have to bring to our podcast today?
Well, the only other thing I'd add, because our conversation has really covered a lot of territory, is that I had to discover who I was all over again, almost like reinventing myself. I didn't know what I thought was fun. I didn't know what brought me joy. I didn't know what made me sad. And I have written a blog about how to discover who you are after leaving a high control religion. And it's about some of the actual techniques that were helpful for me, like journaling, obviously working with a therapist, and also learning mindfulness techniques to slow down enough to understand how my brain is working so that I can interrupt the automatic patterns and have a little bit more emotional regulation. And also things like, saying yes to something new. For like once a week, say yes to something new, because you don't know what makes you happy anymore. You don't know what you're going to find gratifying. So it's a list of kind of getting to know yourself almost all over again. And I think that's important.
It takes an awful lot of effort too. I think early on you mentioned that as you were questioning the Mormon Church, you started to question God in general. Same thing for a lot of people, same thing for me, because God is so intricately weaved into Mormonism that as Mormonism falls apart, there is no separation. Like trying to unweave the helical DNA, it's very difficult to do that without just crashing it all down. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that we're not taught how to think. Right. We're not taught how to critically examine stuff. For me, I certainly don't consider myself an atheist, but I don't know if I believe in God anymore. And mostly it comes down to, as I started to critically examine Mormonism, I was also exposed to critically examining things like the Bible and recognizing that there's so much in there that I'm not okay with. There's so much in there that the history of the Bible just leaves me questioning. There's so much of life in and of itself. If God is what Mormonism claims he is, he's a prick,
right.
Like he doesn't care. He cares about me finding my keys, but he doesn't care about mass genocide in Africa, right. That kind of thing. And that's a real struggle as we start to find ourselves. I listen to a lot of Brene Brown. I've read a lot of those kinds of things that just help me to unpack and understand myself a little better. But it's a huge process. And ironically, it happens when I'm in my mid-40s. I'm already exhausted.
Yeah.
You're
already the high population for all the bad things that happen to men, midlife crisis. Yeah.
Right. I'm right at that midlife crisis. I have lots of kids that are in crisis. Right. And so trying to take time.
Crisis or going to college and growing up, both. We have both.
Trying to take the time to rediscover God feels overwhelming and unnecessary.
I can really relate to that. And I've been out of the church for quite some time now. And I started with baby steps, like learning to meditate. and going to
Mm-hmm.
yoga to get back in touch with my body because my body was the enemy, but I didn't do everything all at once. I took on one little thing, and that would be it for the year, starting a regular yoga practice. Learning to meditate took years of intermittent practicing before it became a regular practice. And
Yeah.
I don't
Have to be comfortable with that intermittent stuff. We'll do this today. We'll do a little bit of that next week, whatever. Mormonism, high demand religions, they want you to be doing everything all the time, all at once.
exactly.
And
I'm
that's very overwhelming when that then falls apart. I'm left in this situation where I got to figure out, is God real? What's the church I'm going to go to? What am I going to do with this? And it was okay for me once I got to the point where I was like, you know what? It's okay. I don't need to be there yet. Because everybody that talked to me, especially family, were like, well, what do you believe now? What's your, I was like, I don't know. And I don't care at this moment. I've deconstructed.
That's a great point. I had to learn to have some grace and some patience with myself and say, it's okay. And even today, if someone asked me what I believe, I would say, I think it's largely a big mystery, but I can tell you much better today the things I do believe in, which is love and non-judgment and empathy and altruism.
Yeah.
And so I know what I believe, I know what I value, I know what's important to me. And having a precise answer about whether or not there's an overarching creator or a source that interprets our individual needs, I'm no longer searching for the answer for that. I am content with it being a mystery, and it's a much more peaceful place to be than. And I know what it felt like, the urgency. Well, what do I believe then? It felt like I needed to know right away. And I would say patience. Be patient with yourself. Be forgiving. Be tolerant. Give yourself some grace. Treat yourself the way you would treat a dearly loved one.
Well, I would say a dearly loved toddler. Treat yourself the way you would a dearly loved toddler who is discovering the world for the first time.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. It is so valuable for us to replace certainty with curiosity. And curiosity is a little scary at times because we don't know the outcome. And when you've grown up,
curiosity killed the cat.
Right, curiosity killed the cat, but the cat has 9 lives, so it's okay. Yeah. Okay, you got some time here, but it's curiosity is what makes us so unique from other species in the sense of the things that we discover are what has created, our technology today. It's what's helped us land on the moon. Curiosity is a beautiful thing. And we missed that developmental milestone when we were born and raised in a high demand organization or religion that taught us from the time we were little what was certain without a shadow of a doubt, but also with no tangible evidence. You have to take it on faith. I'm here to say faith is invaluable. We need faith. And I'm even going to take the Mormon, definition of faith from, I think it's from the Book of Mormon. It might be from the Bible. I don't remember. Mason, you'll correct me here, which is faith is a hope for things that are not seen. I'm going to leave off the part that is true because there's no way for us to know that. But faith is hope. Yes. It's our ability to believe that you're going to be okay when it doesn't look like it's going to be okay, and to proceed with hope. That's what faith is. That's invaluable. Yeah. But you cannot let your faith destroy human curiosity and your ability to think critically and to explore things and to try new things. Lynn, I love that you're like, I didn't go out and learn how to do 7 different mindful activities all at once. I might have read about mindfulness. I knew it would help. And I started with yoga. And once I learned whether or not yoga was for me, then I expanded. But I spent some good quality time with yoga. You know, if you've gotten 4 or 5, 6 sessions into yoga and you're like, I hate this shit. All right, well, then let's move on to something else. But that's what's so beautiful about curiosity. I think the other thing with Mormons is they're afraid to get it wrong. They're afraid to be wrong. And, you know, if I try out something like yoga, or like in our case, Mason and I love alcohol. A drink or two in a social setting is very enjoyable for me. When I'm really stressed out, it's enjoyable for me. Mason hates it. He thinks it tastes disgusting. And so, but there's no way he would have learned that about himself if he hadn't been willing to try it. And so it's okay for you to try coffee or alcohol or caffeine or plurality in your relationship, as long as you are willing to be wrong. And as long as you're willing to work through it. You know, I'm not saying go jump in the deep end. I'm saying one little thing at a time. I love, Lynn, that you said you've got to go one step at a time.
Yeah.
Really love that. Such beautiful wisdom.
Well, I have so enjoyed our discussion. I love the contrast between someone who's looking from as a brand new or recently exited member of the church, and also someone with your experience and skill set that left and have had a longer time to absorb the lessons and talk with others about their experiences.
Well, it has been an absolute joy to have you, Lynn. I wish you all the luck in your book. Again, Lynn, please, I want you to say the title of your book just to make sure that I'm not saying it wrong. So listeners, keep your eye out for this book. Lynn is working right now with publishers to get this book out as soon as possible. Having published my own book, I know that we can say, oh, it'll be out in 3 months and then 8 months later. So I don't want to give a timeline on this, but I do want you to keep your eyes open. And you can learn more about the release of this book on your website, I'm sure. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Lynn? If you follow me on Instagram or social media, it's just Lynn Smith Gregory. And I will be updating followers with the publication date. But my book is called We Were Smiths, Escaping the Shadow of Joseph Smith's Mormon Legacy.
Okay, I love that. I love the word escape the shadow. That, like, those 3 words together in your title would definitely catch my attention. So for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, you can see the website right here. Learn more about Lynn. Lynn at lynnsmithgregory.com. That's Lyn. So Lynn spells her name with one N. So lynnsmithgregory.com. And then Lynn, tell us a little bit about your blog as well, please.
Well, my blog talks about more details, goes into more detail what it was like being raised as practically Mormon royalty, what the impact of that was, what my decision was like in learning the truth about the Mormon Church's past and my famous ancestor, Joseph Smith. And I also address Mormon controversies and try to be helpful to others who are exiting a high control organization or religion about what was helpful to me in my journey. You know, one of my blogs is how to tell if your high control organization or religion is a cult, and what are the characteristics of cults, and others are providing resources and support communities that can be helpful if you've left one, therapy and counseling resources, books and publications, etc. So it's really a mashup of a lot of different things that interest me about Mormons and about other controversies or issues pertaining to high control religions.
Nice.
I absolutely love that. I love that you've got a space that is female-led, female-inspired, and we are very honored to share the Ex-Mormon space with you, Lynn. So, listeners, again, thank you so much. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments, you can, or anything you'd like to add to our show today, you are welcome to visit us, Sarah and Mason, at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. Oh, I'm sorry, that's funny. Yes, email us. There we go. Email us at daisygirlcommunications.com or visit the website at daisygirlcommunications.com. I do not know why I always get that like words jumbled in my mouth. Our greatest takeaway today, I think, from our show is to remember to pace yourself, listener, in practicing curiosity to discover who you really are. It has been a wonderful show. Thank you again, Lynn, so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Until next time, listeners, protect your joy. Bye-bye.
Curiosity killed the cat.
Right, curiosity killed the cat, but the cat has 9 lives, so it's okay.